fifth speaker is going to be Efren Edwards. I went to school with his aunt. Yes. We were in eighth grade. We went eight years together at Immaculate Conception. So I'm pleased to have Efren. He is also a former Alaska, as I was, and was a board member of Filipinos at Microsoft Employee Network, and is working on a storytelling piece called Sharing Our Stories.
Hi, I'm Efren Edwards. I'm not sure why I'm here because these peers that I'm with are incredible. They've been my mentors for years. Auntie Dorothy was there when my dad's family actually arrived on that boat she was talking about in 1945 while the war was still going on. There are so many different things, stories, and I had to narrow it down to something that I like, baseball. Before there was Ichiro, before there was Otani, and not long after Jackie Robinson, there was Bobby Balcena, who you just mentioned, the Filipino Flyer. Decades ago, I remember our beloved Uncle Fred Cordova showing some younger folks a glass-encased rookie card of Rams quarterback Roman Gabriel, who had a Filipino father. And you probably know why. We were all searching for heroes who looked like us. Someone with Pinoy blood on the big stage where we were rarely represented. Someone who made us believe we could be there someday. For Seattle's Filipino community in the 1950s, Bobby Balcena was that person. Back then, Sixth Stadium sat in the heart of the Rainier Valley in South Seattle, in an area once known as Garlic Gulch. It was home to the AAA Seattle Pilots and where Balcena played starting in 1955. When I was growing up, I was a huge baseball fan. My dad would sometimes catch me watching baseball on TV and start talking about Bobby Balcena, someone I later realized that just wasn't his hero, but a hero to many Filipino boys of his generation. Balcena was a diminutive, slick-fielding center fielder, and Seattle's Filipino community would flock to Sixth Stadium in droves to watch him play. After joining the Pilots in 1955, he quickly endeared himself to fans and teammates alike with his cheerfulness and hustle. He played with an unmistakable spark, a joy that showed in every inning. Though he stood just 5'7", he had surprising power, collecting more than his fair share of extra base hits. Off the field, the same warmth carried through. He looked after the people who supported him, passing along bats, gloves, and small moments of kindness that fans never forgot. And for kids especially, there was something powerful in watching him, a smaller player going up against bigger, stronger athletes and not just keeping up, but shining. It made the dream feel real. For Filipino kids, that feeling was exponentially stronger. Someone like them had finally made it. On September 16, 1956, 9 years after Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier, Bobby Balcena became the first Asian American and the first player of Filipino ancestry to appear in a Major League Baseball game. He played in 7 games that season, returned to the Rainiers the following year, and never made it back to the majors. His time in the league was brief, a Moonlight Graham moment, but that moment lasted. Because in the Filipino-American community, his impact wasn't measured by how long he played, but it was measured by what he meant. My dad, my uncle, and would sometimes reminisce about a day they never forgot. Rudy Santos, a local Chinatown gambling club owner and a generous community supporter, knew how much people loved the Filipino Flyer and arranged a Seattle Pilots meet and greet with coach Fred Hutchinson and several players, of course, including Balcena. The gathering was held at the Hong Kong restaurant right next to Rudy Santos' gambling joint in Chinatown. Some of you may remember that there was a stairway right next to the Hong Kong that went down, and there was a door with a slit to see who was coming if you knew the secret door knock. And it seemed like, gatherings held in Hong Kong right next to Rudy's gambling joint, and it seemed like every Pinoy boy in Seattle begged his dad to take him there to meet their hero. My uncle still remembers that day like it happened yesterday. Even now, when you mention Bobby Balcena to Filipino Americans who grew up in that era, their faces light up. You can see it instantly. It takes them back to a time when heroes like them were hard to find, but they did exist. And for many, that hero was Bobby Balcena. Thanks. This is a story that my parents used to tell us when we were growing up. It's called The Storm. When my parents were young, actually, let me start here. It was December 1963, and it had been a terribly cold winter. My dad said the winters back then seemed to be a lot colder than the ones we have now. I was born just 3 months earlier, and from my very first day on Earth, I was in and out of the doctors, always sick. My dad had just brought my mom from the Philippines earlier in the year, and they needed to drive to Olympia that week to fix an urgent problem with her visa. They had reservations about going because of my health, and concerns the car they were driving wasn't in the best shape. It wasn't the best of times either. Along with my frail health, my dad had lost his job at Boeing, and they just had their car repossessed. And they were living with my grandparents. The problem needed to be resolved, though, or my mom might be deported, so they drove off to Olympia. In Olympia, they fixed her visa problem, and they were making the long drive home through a snowstorm. On a two-lane highway by Chehalis, the car died in the middle of nowhere. It was bitterly cold, and my mom held me close to her, covered in jackets and blankets in the car, as my dad popped the hood to figure out what was wrong. It was futile. There weren't many cars on the road during the storm, and those that did drive by just took a look at my dad's face and kept on going. Concerned that I was going to freeze to death, they spotted a farm off in the distance and decided to try their luck. My dad said that I was so tiny you couldn't even tell that my mom was holding a baby under her long jacket as they trudged through the deep snow to the farmhouse. At the farmhouse, my dad knocked on the door. A grizzled, angry old lady answered, took one look at my dad, and started yelling at him to leave and that he had no business being on her property. It was 1963, and a foreign-looking stranger knocking on your door unexpectedly at the time was an unwelcome sight to many, especially in areas like this that were far from home. The lady then noticed my mom holding me and saw my eyes staring at her even though I was bundled up in blankets and a hat. Her heart immediately melted, and she blurted, "Oh my goodness, you have a baby." She immediately invited them into her house to warm up. My dad said that her disposition had totally changed, offering them food and a place by the warm wood stove. He said she was kind-hearted, but definitely an outspoken and unique lady who spoke of her good-for-nothing husband that she kicked out of the house some years before. I remember my mom saying that she wasn't a big fan of men, always referring to them in a demeaning manner, maybe jokingly, but hard to tell. She then got one of the farmhands who worked for her to tow the car onto the farm, and she even called the local mechanic who lived down the road to come and look at it. She had to stay in her house for 2 days until the car was fixed and the worst of the storm was over. 3 total strangers. She was heartbroken to see us go. Years later, when I was a teen, my family on occasion would drive by the farmhouse and we'd pass it on the highway, and I'd hear my mom and dad tell the story again about the seemingly mean lady who took us in during that horrendous snowstorm one December long ago. We never got sick of hearing it over the years. Even when my siblings and I were adults and starting our own families, that story would find its way into our Christmas and Thanksgiving get-togethers with mom and dad. It disappeared after my mom passed in 1999, like part of it had died with her. But a few years back, the night before my dad passed, I asked him to tell it one last time. And he did. Now I share it with all of you. I truly believe that this event helped shape my parents' belief that there are better times ahead for them in making a life here. That you might always find someone with compassion to help you weather out the proverbial storm. Sometimes in a place where you least expected it. Here's to hope for better times for all of us. Thank you.